All right. Well, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about strategies for making updates to your course. I'm Hetal Thacker. With me is Caroline Coy. We're both LSA Learning and Teaching Consultants with LSA Technology Services. And so think about, as we are talking today, about a change that you would like to make to a course you have taught in the past or one that you're planning to teach, and think about maybe what's getting in your way or what's stopping you from making that change. And hopefully we can address some of those possible roadblocks or concerns throughout the course of our presentation. Okay, so is it time for a change? So one thing to be thinking about here is regarding, you want to make a change, you've determined that you want to make a change, but now your decision is regarding scale. So what do you want to accomplish? Is it a major overhaul? Is it minor improvements to the course? Is it quick changes? And the way that we decide that maybe is through time, right? Time and energy. So go to the next slide there, Caroline. We're going to see um, a chart here that maybe will help you kind of figure out what you are able to do. So how much time do you have ultimately over? How many of these decisions do we make based on like what are my resources and particularly time, right? Time resources. So if you have a week, let's say, you could make minor updates to policy. You could make some changes to Canvas. You might be able to make some tweaks to an assignment or unit structure. Maybe not, total revamp, but you could definitely make some changes. If you have a little bit of more time, well, then you could go a little bit deeper. So maybe it's doing a major overhaul of an assignment, or maybe it's a major overhaul of your course. So if you're thinking, okay, Wednesday, August 7th, maybe this is not time to make a major overhaul for a fall course. But yeah, if you're thinking ahead to winter, if you're thinking to spring, summer, then that is certainly something that you have time right now to do. So this is the idea here, is that you are giving yourself a chance to be successful, and you're doing that by making sure that you have, right, the time and the resources to make the changes that you want to make. Or maybe we just have to wait and put those off for when we do have time.
I'm going to start by talking about course level changes. So Hetal just mentioned you may not have time for this for the fall. So this might be kind of a future consideration. You can think about what resources are available if you wanted to redesign your course, or if you're teaching a brand new course and you need to design that from scratch, or maybe you've taken over a course from somebody else and you want to make it your own. So if this is something that you don't have time for in the fall, that's okay. We are going to also talk about some small changes that you can make to your course later on in the presentation. So what you can expect from a course redesign consultation, which is part of what our group does, are the following. So first, we would help you with your content. So content curation is especially important to consider when your aim is to add in opportunities for students to actively engage or participate with your lesson. So this does take more time during the class period to do. And because of that, instructors have to make some hard choices around what content should be moved maybe outside of the class session, or maybe they decide that their course might be a little too content heavy and they need to cut some things in order to make room for some more participation from their students. The second part of what will help you think about is scaffolding. So scaffolding at the course level refers to this gradual increase of difficulty over the duration of a course. So you would likely want to start with those foundational concepts and skills, and then move students towards showing mastery of those concepts, or being able to do some of those skills on their own with minimal guidance from you. You may have heard of scaffolding more at like the assignment level. It's the same idea, but we just kind of help you think about it over the course of a semester. And then we talk about this idea of alignment. So the process of alignment starts by reviewing your course learning goals and objectives. So if you have those already set in your syllabus, we'll just take a look. We'll make sure that you're happy with them, that they still align with what you want to be teaching students in that course. And then once those are established, we then look at assessments, and we make sure that those assessments are adequately measuring student progress toward reaching those learning goals. And then from there, we can talk about the assignments that you have, the projects that you might have students do, the in-class activities that you might design if you're hoping to make learning more active, so that students can acquire the knowledge and the skills that they need to reach those course learning outcomes. And then the final part of that redesign is just talking about innovative approaches to teaching and learning. So we might suggest something that's new in the research that we've been keeping up on, and just make sure you're aware that that's a possibility. It's a great opportunity for you to learn about some of those innovative pedagogical approaches, and seek support if you want to implement those. And then also you might have learned about something that a colleague is doing, or you might have gone to a professional conference where you learned about a new strategy and you want to talk it through and see if it's something that makes sense for your course. So we can also just help you decide if that's something you may want to implement. So this is just kind of an overview of what our team does. So as we just discussed, we would get the request from you for this course design or redesign consultation. And this is how we would go about discussing that process with you. So we'd first ask you about your learning goals. We'll try to uncover what students struggle most with in your class and what they have the most difficulty learning, so that we can really focus in on activities that would support that. And then through this conversation about course goals, the goal is to get you feeling really confident that you know exactly what you want your students to know and be able to do by the end of your course. That second step is to talk about those different assessment strategies that you might use. So once you know what you want students to know and be able to do, how are you going to measure that students are able to do that, or that they have acquired that knowledge? So we'll talk through different assessment strategies that could help you meet your needs. And then the final step of a course design or redesign is to actually start helping you plan. So jumping into your course calendar and your syllabus, and putting in, scaffolding out those assessments. And then from here, you can clearly see how much time you have left for content. And hopefully what you'll find is that you can uncover some time that you didn't know you had in order to build in more interactive or active learning opportunities for students. So for anyone who's planning to engage students in project-based learning or do a multimedia assignment, we can also just point out places where students are going to need some time to familiarize themselves with tools, and you'll want to build that in. So just kind of a partner to help you talk through what would be helpful to plan in terms of activities in your syllabus. So again, if you want another eye on that piece, this would be helpful. So this is what this would look like in action as a conversation. So this is a sample from a course. So your consultant would take your learning objective and turn this into a conversation with you. So we might rephrase your learning goal as a question. And this slight shift is something that helps course designers think in terms of teaching and coaching rather than presenting. And so it's something that, you know, we would help model for you as you're thinking about planning out your course, especially if you're planning a brand new course. So as you go through this process of answering these questions for each of your learning goals, these ideas usually just organically arise for how to be interactive and exploratory and the way that students are going to be learning. And those learning activities kind of naturally emerge. And we've also found that more authentic assessment types kind of naturally emerge when you phrase things in questions like this. So how students are going to demonstrate their knowledge and skills, you start thinking about that in ways that are going to mirror real world applications of your content rather than the more traditional knowledge recall that happens on traditional assessments like multiple choice. I'm just pausing here because I know I was talking over the slide. So if you want to take a moment just to read it. All right. So there's a lot of text on this. This is just an example taken straight from like a consultation document where we've kept track of conversations with the faculty member we're working with. So it's pretty messy, which is how it kind of naturally is as we're having those conversations. So again, taking the learning goals that the instructor already had in this case, in a communication and media course around sleep and media, and then trying to show what are some of these activities or these discrete things that students need to be able to do in order to do that overall course level objective. For example, the first one here, critically consume media or make judgments about the media they're consuming. So again, it's more conversational, it's brainstorm, but we try to help guide everything toward course level alignment so that you leave the process with a clear idea of goals, assessments, and how you can plan that out. So you've likely noticed that a recurring goal of the course design process is to make learning more active. So I've mentioned it quite a few times. And that is because in the research, sorry, let me let another person in, or I think my colleagues let them in. In the research on teaching and learning, active learning strategies consistently have been found to increase student learning gains when we compare them to traditional learning methods, like a traditional lecture-based classroom where there's no opportunities for students to actively participate during that lecture, for example. So we see here from this finding that active learning courses or interactive courses are over 2 times as effective in promoting conceptual understanding when compared to a traditional course. Active learning, simply put, is just asking students to actively do something while they're learning. So this can be as simple as asking students to think through an idea and then respond to a poll, or asking students to apply a concept they learned about to a case study. So a component of active learning that's sometimes overlooked is this second piece of the metacognitive awareness that students develop. So through doing, students become aware of what they are understanding, and they also become aware of what they're not understanding. Because when you ask them to do something, if they cannot do it, they know they haven't understood, they're not ready. Where that may be more invisible to them if they're in the passive learning position. So this leads to more engagement from students as they seek to understand during a lesson or during a learning activity. This is a great visual that breaks down the difference between active and passive learning. And it shows how students recall and their ability to apply new concepts increases as learning becomes more active. So we see that students remember 10% of what they read, but they remember 90% of what they do. And then over on the skills side of things, the higher level skills, their ability to engage in those higher level skills like analyzing, creating, and evaluate increases as they're asked to orally explain or say or write or to do something. I like to point out that active learning is a spectrum. So there are many ways that you can integrate active learning into your class. You don't need to have students engaging in field work to do this well. You can see the benefits of active learning when you just simply ask students to respond in writing to a question that you pose during a lecture. So instead of lecturing the entire time, breaking it up, and asking questions during that so that students are actively engaged in applying the concepts that you are teaching. If you're interested in redesigning your course to make the entire kind of course feel very active, there are a few course designs that our team can discuss with you and help you implement. The next part of my section is just to briefly go over those. If you're interested in any of them, that would require more of the full course design conversation. So the first one is the flipped classroom. And we have a lot of classes at the university that use this model. And in the flipped classroom, what you do is that you provide opportunities for students to interact with the content outside of your class session. So you give them that first exposure, sometimes through a lecture that you've recorded and then you've posted and you've asked them to watch. So you're moving the passive portion of the lesson outside of class. What's important here is that students are given a little bit of an incentive to complete that, because you do need them to come into that class session prepared. So maybe there's a short quiz that assesses that they comprehended the lecture recording or whatever it was you asked them to engage with. Maybe you use discussion board in order to check that. And then in class, there's normally this informal, low stakes assessment of what they're coming in already understanding. And that helps you to uncover what is most valuable for you to spend class time on. And then in class, that's where students are doing. They're engaged in higher order thinking. So for example, you might have them analyzing something together in class and you're guiding that process and you're asking questions during it, and then they're submitting something they deliver to you at the end. So it's much more active during the class session. Think about flipping what you might ask a student to do on a homework assignment or an out of class assignment with what you typically might do in class traditionally, which is providing the content. So you're providing the content outside of class, and then you're asking students to do the application piece or the activity piece in class with your expert guidance available. There's also the option to do a partial flip, which is also pretty popular. So in a partial flip, you might provide a condensed version of the lecture in class, just so you can go through and make sure that they were understanding. Or you might continue the lecture. You might just do foundational concepts outside of class, and then some of the more higher level conceptual pieces that you want to provide examples for and be able to answer questions. You might still do like 30 minutes of that interactive lecture in class before moving to an activity. The other course type that we support is team-based learning. So in team-based learning, students are in highly structured teams, which is different from group work, where you might just have them group themselves or number them, and you're not really an active part of forming those teams. Typically, students stay in these teams over the duration of a unit, or even the whole course in many cases. They get to know their teammates. And a big goal of using this course type is that they are developing some transferable skills by working in a course that's designed this way. So you are wanting them to learn how to collaborate, to learn how to problem solve with others. So if that's something that is important in your field, in your discipline, and you know you want to spend time providing a bit of coaching around some of those interpersonal skills, this is a great course type to consider. If you know about team-based learning, it's used a lot in medical schools, and it's very structured, and it's a little bit different than how we use it in LSA because we have so many different departments with different needs. So our cornerstones at LSA are that the teams are structured. You've thought about who is in what team and why. Maybe you have diverse skill sets. You are still applying that flipped classroom model. So students are still engaging in the passive content acquisition outside of class, and then they're working in their team to now apply the learning. So the difference is the team. And then you're focused on the process. So you're also giving feedback not only on were they able to complete the learning task, but also how did they work together? So an element of this is building their skills to be able to work and function as a productive team. And then we do have classrooms that are specifically designed for this. So they have team stations where students sit together. They have their own screen. You have the ability to pull content from their screen and project it to the whole class. So there's technology that supports this course type that if you're interested in it, we can set you up with a classroom tour and introduce you to what's available. And then we have project-based or authentic assessments. So instead of, like I mentioned, more of a traditional assessment, knowledge recall, pen and paper tests or multiple choice, this is where it would be more project-based, where students are asked to be hands-on and solve a real-world problem. This allows students to demonstrate that they understand, but also apply their knowledge. So your course, you might have interactive lecture, but then the active learning piece is actually this project that students work on. These can look like student presentations, case studies, simulations that students engage with, multimedia projects, portfolio assignments. There are more, and depending on your course and your learning goals, we could discuss those with you. So if you're interested in more of a full level course redesign, there's classroom technology support, there's digital tools training, more course modalities training. If you are so excited and you want to do a whole redesign and you need funding, we have grants. So this is just an overview of some of the support that is available if you're wanting to try something new and innovative. But you want support, like for example, with accessibility, and you want someone to guide you through. I want to do a website, but I want to make sure it's accessible. We can work with you to answer those questions. So now we're going to move on to if you want to do a smaller change or refresh to your course.
Thanks, Caroline. So there are a couple of questions in the chat about, I think, both flipped and team-based learning. And so maybe it might be worthwhile just addressing them before we move on from those topics. So the first question was about how to ensure that teams are actually working as a team and not just kind of disseminating work and then slapping it together at the end. And since Caroline, I think you work a lot with our team-based learning
Mhm.
instructors, maybe you want to take that one.
Um, Great question. So because of that question, that's why this is in the full course design section and not in the small changes, because it does take time and planning to get teams to function as a true team. So when I work with instructors who are interested in this, I have a lot of materials for how to set a team up for success. So I have activities I can share with you that are like a working style survey, and then they all come together with their survey results and they come up with team norms that try to honor their different working styles, and they commit to how they're going to work together. The other piece of it is in designing the assignment that would be appropriate for a team. And during the team-based learning training, I go over how to do this, and that's an upcoming session that's offered. But when you think about a team-based learning assignment, it should not be something that can be accomplished by one individual student. Because if it is something that can be accomplished by one individual student, that's where you get into that issue of a student who doesn't want to wait till the last minute. Their working style is they want to complete it up front. Nobody else is on board, so they end up taking it on, and then they have a really bad experience because they've done everything. So we work a lot in that session on how do you create a team assignment that is in need of multiple individuals in order to be accomplished. And that's kind of the key. And so if you're interested in that and you have the time on your calendar, I would recommend signing up for that session. And if you can't make it, I will send the recording out to anyone who's registered. So you can just go ahead and register.
When is that? I didn't see it in the email that had these listed.
Oh, really? It's the introduction to team-based learning.
Okay.
And I can send you the link. It is Tuesday, the 13th at 1 p.m.
Okay.
And I'll put the link in the chat during huddle section so you can sign up for that if you would like. But that's a great question. That is the key. That is the difference between group and teamwork, is the assignment you're asking them to do. Yeah.
And I think the other question regarding how to incentivize the low stakes work, I think that related to the flipped classroom.
Yeah.
I think, similarly, even though it's low stakes work, right? If we're connecting it to the in-class work that they're doing, then the incentive is not just that, it's low stakes, but it's also that it will make the work that you do in class easier, right? That it is not just watch this lecture, or it's not just read this chapter, that it is more integrated into the in-class activity that they're doing, so that, okay, you're doing this low stakes assignment, but it's preparing you for the deep analytical work maybe that you're doing in class, in that flipped structure. So
I was just going to ask, do you have any seminars, workshops on the flipped classroom method? I teach in German, and that's sort of our prevailing norm. And I haven't had a lot of success with it. And maybe I just don't understand it, or I'm not doing it correctly. So that was my question. Do y'all have anything specifically on the flipped classroom?
We do. We have resources, and I'm happy to send those to you.
Sweet.
Words. Yes. And that is, again, we were also available like for a one-on-one. If you have that particular class that you want to, make better, we can certainly talk to you about that and work with you one-on-one there. So you're not just relying on, slides or resources. Okay, so keep the questions coming. They're wonderful. We're going to move on to, maybe you're thinking full scale redesign, not in my cards right now. But, there are little things. I have a little bit of, space to make some small changes that will make, meaningful improvements to the class. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so what we suggest here is to think in ones, right? So if you're going to if you have, time to make some kind of a change, think one assignment, one issue, one activity that you could either improve upon or add to make kind of an impactful change to your course. I'm going to kind of go into each one of those and what they might look like. So one assignment. So what might that look like in terms of the changes that you could make? So this could be an assignment that maybe is still pretty fresh. You've used it a couple of times, but there's a room for improvement. But it could also be the old workhorse assignment that you've been using for a really long time. But maybe you're not getting the student results that you were hoping for when you created that assignment, right? And so this might be a situation where you can clarify outcomes or the assignment description. So what does that mean? Well, sometimes we're not getting what we want from our students because we're not telling them how this assignment connects to the learning outcomes. Like what is it that you want them to get out of this, right? And so sometimes clarifying that for students right on the assignment can be really helpful. This could be also adding some kind of multimedia component. Multimedia components are a great way to increase engagement, to freshen up your course, to add those authentic skills. And it's also a way to, maybe make an assignment more AI aware. So if you're worried about that, taking an essay or a multiple choice exam and replacing with something more authentic, is a great improvement to make to your course. So that's still pretty, that's if you're taking, for instance, an exam and turning it into an authentic assessment, that might be a web page. That could be something like maybe a podcast if you want to get, real crazy. It could be something as simple as, a digital poster instead of an essay or a research poster or a slide deck. So there are ways that you can add that multimedia component. It could be a marketing, document of some sort that can provide that little bit of refreshment to that one assignment. But you can also think about the supplemental materials. Maybe the assignment itself is good, but the readings you haven't changed for a while. So maybe you're going to I'm going to dedicate 1 week to just updating the readings for this unit, or I'm going to add some case studies or some recent research I heard about. Or, my favorite thing was, oh, I remember hearing this thing on the radio that relates to this one assignment that I have, and I'm going to go and add that right to my Canvas module. So updating those supplemental materials is a useful time. Another thing you can add, just to going back to those clarifying of outcomes, is add a student sample. So if you've been giving this assignment for a while, you may probably have some student examples now. So the best practice is to just shoot that student a quick email and say, is it okay if I share this, right, with my contemporary class? But adding a student model, it will save you so much, so much time in responding to student emails. And for your students, it's really helpful for them to see what you are expecting, especially with those authentic assessments, things they're not really familiar with. Another thing you can do is maybe you haven't done this before, but you have, a high stakes, complicated assignment. Add a video explanation. So even if you are going over it during your lecture, going over it in class, you have it all written out, maybe that student didn't pay attention in class because they thought they understood it, or maybe, that was 3 weeks ago and now they're finally going around to doing it and they don't remember anything, right? And so having that same explanation in a brief, 1 to 2 minute video that you can post in Canvas with the assignment, it can go a long way in, again, kind of clearing things up for your students and maybe clearing up your email inbox too. Or maybe you can look at your Canvas videos that you already have, and maybe you made them during the pandemic, like many of us, first made our videos, and they might still have references to the pandemic. Is the pandemic still happening? You can say, well, it's still relevant, and that's fine too. But maybe it's time to refresh those, right? 4 years is a long time for a video, and again, instead of going, I'm going to redo all of my videos in Canvas, that can be really overwhelming. I think that's a major undertaking. But for this one unit, maybe it's just your welcome videos you're going to focus on, or this one assignment that I'm gonna add something to. That can be one good way of improving an assignment. So another Another thing you might think about is cognitive load. So when we're talking about cognitive load, we're talking about just how much information a student is able to take and process, not just a student, but anybody, in one time, right? And so part of that is intrinsic. This is a challenging subject. You don't know anything about organic chemistry. It's going to be challenging for you. And then there's just the process of learning material, right? That takes up that cognitive, strength that we have. But then there are these extra things, right? So if we're saying, right, we're learning, it's challenging, and this is us kind of gaining new memory, the extraneous cognitive load is like a speed bump, right, in there. And those are the things that slow you down, that block your learning, that make it more challenging to learn. And these are the things that are not necessarily related to the actual learning process. So these are things that are like a disorganized Canvas page. I can't figure this out. I mean, our Zoom link wasn't working. If this was for a class, that would be an extraneous cognitive load issue. Like, oh, now I have to figure out how to get into class. I'm stressed out. And so one thing that we can do, if you go to the next slide there, Caroline, is you can think about ways to lessen cognitive load, either in your course, or if that's too overwhelming, then again, in one assignment, right? So this could be something like, I think having a student model is an example of improving cognitive load, for instance. But from some other ideas is you can just think about the organization of your Canvas page, right? Is it working for you? Do you get a lot of emails from students saying, where do I find blah, 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 right? Or I can't find yada, yada. Are there changes that you can make to make this more easily navigable? And this, again, is something that we can help with, right? So we can be that outsider perspective. Sometimes it's hard for us to see in our own course what's working, what's not working. Do we have due dates posted in multiple locations? Are there assignment instructions that are clear? How many tools are you using, right? How many tech tools are we using? And this is, really rich coming from the team that handles all the tech tools and encourages you to use them. But, there is, I think, a great benefit in using tech tools. And then there is the, ooh, shiny, I want to use that too, and this one too, and this one too. And sometimes we get a little too enthusiastic, we'll say, with our tech use, right? So thinking about, do I actually need to use this tool? Is this something that is just once and done? I'm only, my students are learning how to use this tool, but they're only using it for one assignment. They'll never use it again. Is that really helping their learning or not? And sometimes the answer is yes, right? So maybe you're going to have a WordPress assignment, and WordPress, I think, is a really useful tool for students to know how to use. But sometimes, not so much. So every time a student has to stop their learning to learn a tool in order to complete an assignment, right, that's extraneous cognitive load. Sometimes it's, unavoidable, and sometimes it's not. A lot of these things, I think, they're impactful in a way that is unseen by our students. So your students aren't going to know that you spent a week making the Canvas page more organized and easy to follow, but it's the fact that they're not going to notice it that means it worked, right? Because we only notice these things when they're not intuitive, when they don't work. So it really is helpful to take the time to make this kind of change. Another question, are there ways I can improve accessibility in my course? So again, this might be overwhelming to think about in the large scale of the whole course. So this could be refreshing just an assignment too, right? Do I have subtitles and transcripts for my audio and video? Maybe trying to do that for all of my videos and audio all at once is challenging, but I can focus on maybe the high stakes assignments. Am I using alt text for images in my slide decks or on my Canvas page? Can I go in and add that, right? So even each of these things, maybe you're thinking one at a time. WebAIM is a really good resource for this. It's a website with lots of good resources. We also have some workshops coming up to deal with accessibility as well. And each of these links will link to different WebAIM pages that will explain these. So if you're interested in that, but that's a great way. That's another thing where it's a small thing, but boy, is it impactful to make this kind of change. Alt text is the, I'm just seeing in the chat here, I get a question, which is what is alt text? And alt text is basically the text description of an image for people with visual impairments. So having that, it's nice. You would be able to hover over an image and see, okay, is this decorative? What is this image, of? Great question. Next slide. So maybe the question that you have is, how can I make my class more engaging and student-centered? So Caroline, I think, made a great argument for active learning earlier on. And so these are individual strategies. So again, this is kind of small scale, right? We're going to think about one of these, focus on one thing we can change. So if you have a large enrollment lecture course, maybe you're introducing an engagement tool like iClicker. If you haven't used iClicker in a couple of years, it's become a lot easier to use, I think, and it's a lot easier for setup and integrates well with Canvas, and it does a lot of wonderful things. So you might include iClicker or maybe a social annotation tool, which will not only encourage critical reading, but it shows students how to engage in conversation with both the text and each other. So it's really helpful in that way. I think adding reflection time, right? When we're thinking again about cognitive load, when we're thinking about memory, reflection is so underrated, I think. Adding times for reflection for students to process and apply what they are learning is really beneficial. And so having time for an exit ticket or a reflection activity, a quick add, one sentence here to iClicker, or, a couple sentences here to a Canvas discussion, it really improves, your students' abilities to remember what they read, or remember what they've heard, and to kind of process, right? If I can put it in writing, that thinking into writing, it's going to just help me reinforce that idea even more. And then I'll talk a little bit more about some of these options for Think, Pair, Share and other kind of in-class activities that can improve engagement, I think, in the next slide. Okay, so small steps, either you can, add something like Perusall or iClicker, or you can think on the individual lecture, scale. So we're not talking about all of your lectures are going to be redone, in one term, but try something a little different with your lectures. So really think, and I think in K through 12, they kind of really break down their teaching time like this, where they're making sure they're leaving time and space for thinking and processing and doing. And I think that's a really good model for us as well, right? So maybe you're taking a 70-minute lecture and instead of having maybe 5 minutes of introduction and 60 minutes of lecture and 5 minutes of conclusion, maybe we're going to lecture for 15 minutes. We're going to give students a break where they're able to process what they've just heard, talk to a neighbor, turn to a partner, kind of check their understanding with each other, make sure they both got it. Or maybe this is a moment, be like, oh my gosh, I spaced out for the last 10 minutes. What did I miss? And, their peer can fill them in. And then come back, right? And then you can have a little bit more lecture and then something where they're getting to apply those concepts. So this doesn't have to be every time, but breaking up your lecture like this can really improve engagement. It can improve, hopefully, learning because they're getting a chance to do. So, if that full scale flipped, is stressing you out or not, something in your cards, this is really a good middle ground because you're giving students a chance to learn and apply, and get some lecture all in one class. It does take some work in planning though, which is why it's a small, right? Start small with 1 or 2. So these are all things that we can help with, right? So if you have questions, the learning and teaching consultants, we can sit down with you. We can talk about Perusall and iClicker and other social engagement tools. We can talk about the setup of your lecture, as well as the bigger things, right? So it could just be as simple as, I have this assignment and it's not working for me. What are some ideas that we could maybe refresh this assignment, right? How can we make this maybe more AI aware, maybe more multimedia friendly, whatever it might be, or maybe more accessible. So you can, email us, you can submit a ticket for a consultation, but we are happy to help you.